this week on the Fantasy Beatdown, our first week of the season has ended, and we've got some standings to talk about and some matchups to talk about. So we're talking about that. Then we'll talk a little bit about some players that I feel performed really well, some players from each team who haven't performed very well, and we'll preview next week's matchups. So we have Bomb Squad versus Sad Sacks. Now, 935.5 versus 891.5. Bomb Squad came out on top for a 44-point spread. It was a pretty tight matchup. It was the tightest one of the week. Bomb Squad's best players were Rick Nash, PK Subban, and Henrik Lundqvist. Now, Rick Nash was on fire. He had 7 goals. He averaged 20.5 points per game, and he totaled 122.5 fantasy points on the week. That's a great start for Nash. Now, PK Subban, he's got 3 goals, 17 shots, 16 hits, and he's averaging 17.7 fantasy points per game, which totaled for 106 fantasy points on the week, which was best among all defensemen in the league. Henrik Lundqvist was his next best player, who tallied 75.5 fantasy points. He had 3 wins in the first week with a shutout. He played 5 games though, so that helped him get to 75.5. So Sad Sacks' best players were Ryan Getzlaf, who totaled 100 fantasy points. He had 2 goals, 6 assists in the week. He averaged 16.7 points per game. That's really good. Jeff Carter was his next player I got on the list here. 87.5. Strong start for Carter. He had 3 goals and 3 assists. His line looks to be on fire right now. Carter averaged 14.6 points per game. His next player, which is a nice surprise, I would say, for him, and I'm kind of surprised as well, but Tommy Wingels totaled 93.5 fantasy points this week. He's got 3 goals, 1 assist, 20 hits, 15.6 points per game, which is great. Wingels was pretty good last year in our league, but we were worried about the hits being lowered by 0.5 this year affecting him, but he came through in week 1. Hopefully this production continues. Now, underachievers for each team. For Bomb Squad, I've got Thomas Vanek, Nathan MacKinnon, and Marian Hossa. Now, Vanek, he had 20 points on the whole week. He averaged 5 points per game, and he only got 1 assist with 13 shots. That's not good for a player of his stature. Then Nathan MacKinnon, he tallied 36 points. He had 3 assists, 18 shots. He averaged 6 points per game. I'm still a little worried about him in the whole sophomore jinx. We'll see how this plays out, though. Next, I got Marian Hossa, who he only got 1 goal the whole week, and it was on the power play, so he averaged 8.9 points per game and totaled 35.5 points. It's a little bit better production out of Hossa. Would have been nice for Bomb Squad, even though he pulled out the victory. Sad Sacks' worst players were Sean Monahan, who had 0 goals and averaged 4.5 points per game and totaled 31 points on the week. And I'm not sure, but I think the Flames may have played the most games or tied for most games played in the opening week. His next weakest player was Ryan McDonough, who totaled 32 fantasy points with no goals, no assists, and averaging 5.3 points per game. That's not a very good clip for a defenseman of his caliber. And then Thomas Tatar from the Red Wings, he only totaled 28.5 points on the week. He got 1 goal on 11 shots and averaged 5.7 points per game. Now, some of the moves that the owners made, I've got 1 for each team in all the matchups. 1 good move, 1 bad move for each owner. So, the good move for Bomb Squad was picking up both P.A. Parenteau and Johan Franzen. After the acquisitions, both came up big for him with multi-goal nights. So that was his good move. Now, his bad move was he had Jason Pominville on his team, who totaled 43.5 points, which isn't that great, but it's still quality points. He is averaging 10.9 points per game, which is a good rate. But Bomb Squad only had Pominville in his lineup for 8 of those fantasy points, so he missed the boat a little bit on that one. Now, TJ Brody, moving over to Sad Sacks, TJ Brody he added, and TJ's looked really good. He's picked up a goal and 2 assists in 3 games played for Sad Sacks, but I'm not sure. I've got him later. We'll talk about him later, but that was a great ad so far by Sad Sacks. And then his worst play was probably, this is a kind of a fluke, I would say, but he had Ollie Ekman-Larsson on his bench one night, and Ollie got an overtime game-winning goal, so he missed out on like at least 20 points right there, probably more. I've written down here that Ekman Larson totaled the week 54 points, and he only had him in for 25 of those points, so I'm basically assuming that he missed him on that one game, and that hurts when the guy gets an OT winner like that. That's a lot of points lost. So the second matchup we're going to look at here is Completely Stammered, who scored 842.5 versus Route 66, who scored 953.5 to win the week by 111 points. Top performers for Completely Stammered were Steven Stamkos. Obviously, he's got him. He scored 111 fantasy points on the week. He had 5 goals and 2 assists, 28 shots. He averaged 22.3 points per game. That's what you expect from Stamkos. Great start for him. His next best player I got here is Johnny Boychuk. Now, Johnny got 80.5 fantasy points on the week. He's been playing on the number 1 power play unit, racked up 2 goals, 4 assists. It's a great start for Johnny. He's averaging 16.1 points per game. He looks really rejuvenated being away from Boston. Not that he wasn't good in Boston, but they weren't utilizing him like this, and he looks really good. His next best player, I've got Dustin Byfuglien, who totaled 70 fantasy points on the week. Thanks to his 18 PIMs and 12 hits, is about the only reason he really got to that, but that's still a good number. 14 points per game for Byfuglien is a pretty good stat clip. Now, Route 66, his best players were Patrick Hornqvist, who he got 102.5 fantasy points, 4 goals, 4 assists, 28 shots, averaged 25.6 points per game on the week. And I mean, that's a ridiculous stat line for a guy like that. If he can keep that up, that's really impressive. Then he's got Mike Camilleri. Camilleri, he had 5 goals on the week, 2 assists, opening with a 21.3 point per game rate over the first week, which is really impressive. He totaled 106.5 fantasy points. That's great for a guy like him. Next, I got Patrick Marleau. Now, Patrick Marleau for Route 66 totaled 91 fantasy points, 4 goals and 3 assists, averaging 15.2 points per game to start the season. But this reminds me a whole lot like last year. I think last year he got, I think he had maybe 12 goals in the first 7 games or something ridiculous like that. It was intense, but then he really cooled off after the first month or so of the season. So we'll see what happens with Patrick, but he had a great week to start here for Route 66. So now some weaker performances from each team. On Completely Stammered, I've got Steve Ott. He only picked up 27.5 fantasy points in 5 games, averaging 5.5 points. Now he's really struggling, I'm going to say, as far as fantasy value goes. He used to have some value back when he played for Buffalo and Dallas. Even when he was in Dallas, he had value. But in St. Louis, he's kind of lost in the mix there. He's not getting that much minutes. He's not relied upon really at all. So his opening week isn't looking good going forward for Steve Ott. Next worst player, I've got Ben Lovejoy. 35 fantasy points on the week, only 1 assist, 5.9 points per game. Move on from that, we got Dustin Brown. Now, the Kings are off to a fairly good start, but Brown himself has only got 43.5 points on the week. He's got 1 goal, and he's averaging 7.3 points per game. He's usually a guy who gets a bit better point per game average than that, so we'll see what happens going forward. Now, Route 66, his worst performers, we're going to start off with Christian Ehrhoff, who got 18.5 fantasy points on the whole week playing on a team with the Penguins is not good enough. He's averaging 4.6 points per game. He's not on the first power play unit. They're playing 4 forwards and Letang out there most of the time. So it's not looking good moving forward for Ehrhoff. Then his next player, I got Alex Semin, who is, again, he got 18.5 fantasy points on the week, only 2 assists on the whole season. He's averaging 4.6 points per game. Both him and Ehrhoff, if they keep up the 4.6 point clip, I mean, that's worth a drop. There's no point in even having them. There's guys on the waiver wire who are doing much better than that regularly. So his next worst player, I've got Anze Kopitar. Anze, he had an okay week, 47 points, 1 goal and an assist to start off the season. 7.9 points per game. That's not bad, but I expect a little bit more from a first-line center, especially in our fantasy league where points are of the essence. So now on to the owner's choice moves. The move I like the most for Completely Stammered, He picked up Alex Stalock, I think, about midway through the week. That's a great ad. Stalock started 3 times already. He's got a shutout. San Jose is going to win a bunch. So if Stalock and Niemi, they're basically at a 50-50 if they stay like that. Stalock's a pretty good ad. His worst performance I had to dig pretty deep to find. I think it came on opening night. Pascal Dupuis, or maybe the second night of the season, whatever. Pascal Dupuis had a big night, a goal and 3 assists performance to break the 30-point plateau on just the one evening. So that's a great night, but completely Stammen had him on the bench and missed out on that. Now Route 66, he's made a couple moves I like, but the move of his I like the most would be adding Michael Bodker. At this point, Bodker started the season, he's got 5 goals on 15 shots. You know, that's a lot of goals on not very many shots. He totaled 90 points on the week. So we'll see what happens. I mean, Bodker is going to be relied heavily upon in Arizona for offense. So things are looking good for Bodker. And then his worst move or play, I would say, was he missed out on a bunch of points from Alex Steen. Steen collected 57 points on the week, and Route 66 only gathered 10 of Steen's total points. So, but otherwise, this was a good matchup. Both teams had good stat totals, like just a tough matchup for Completely Stammered, because Route 66 had a good week. So the next matchup, we had Mercedes-Benz, who totaled 1,002 points, against Carlsons of Anarchy, who totaled 724 points, for a point spread of 277.5, which was the biggest blowout of the week. Top performers for each team: Mercedes-Benz, Chris Kunitz, 90 points on the week, 2 goals, 23 hits, 22.5 points per game. It's a pretty good clip for Kunitz. His next best player is Radim Verbata. Verbata totaled 84 fantasy points, 3 goals, 2 assists, getting 21 points per game, which is very good for Verbata. Then next he's got Jamie Benn. Jamie got 84.5 points, 3 goals, 3 assists, and a fight, 16.9 points per game. That's a pretty good clip for Jamie Benn. Carlsons of Anarchy best player was Corey Perry, 102 fantasy points, 5 goals on 19 shots. That's good enough for 17 points per game. That's just the start you wanted to see from a guy like Corey Perry. 5 goals in the first week's great start. His next best player was Brendan Gallagher. 80 fantasy points on the season, 3 goals and 2 assists on the week. He got 13.4 fantasy points per game. His next best player, and this might be a surprise, was Antoine Roussel. But remember from the draft video, I talked about his team being an interesting setup. So anyways, Roussel had 66 points on the week. He got 2 goals and assists, which is a nice bonus from a guy like him. He had 10 hits on the week, and he averaged 13.2 points per game. Some of the worst players for each team: Mercedes-Benz, Jacob Trouba. He only got 18 points on the week. He was -3. He averaged 3.6 points per game. That's drop-worthy right there. His next worst player was Mika Zibanejad, who got 16.5 fantasy points on the week, no goals or assists. He went at 5.5 point per game clip. Huberdeau was his next worst player at 22.5 points on the week. He got 1 goal in 5 games, and he averaged 6.6 points per game. That's not good enough from a guy like him. Carlsons of Anarchy's worst player, Alice Hemsky, 8 points. 8 fantasy points on the week, 1 assist and 6 shots on the week. He averaged 1.6 points per game. His next worst player is Brendan Dillon, 9.5 fantasy points, 5 shots, 10 hits on the week, 6.3 points per game. Again, that's not a high enough clip. Andrew Ladd was his last worst player, 36.5 points in the week, 1 assist, 12 shots, 13 hits on the week, 7.3 points per game. He's usually a better player than that. The owner's choice, the best move for Tanner Pearson would be the best move for Mercedes-Benz. Picked him up. Brought in 65 fantasy points after he got picked up, and he totaled an impressive 105 on the whole week. That line with Toffoli and Carter and Pearson is off to a torrid start for the Kings. The worst play of the week for Mercedes-Benz was Edler. Edler picked up 41 points on the week, which is mediocre. I didn't have him in, though. I only got 11 of those 41 points, so I missed the boat a little bit on Edler. Carlsons of Anarchy, His best move was a pick and play with Jimmy Howard, I believe on Friday night. Howard, he put him in, got 20 points, big win for the Red Wings, but then Howard got hurt, so we'll have to see what happens in the future here with Howard. And his worst play was having Gus Nyquist, who got 4 goals and 1 assist on the week, good for 76 fantasy points, but Carlson's of Anarchy only had him in starting in his lineup for 1 of those 4 goals and 1 assist and 29 of his 76 points. So that's not very good for Carlson's of Anarchy. The next matchup we have here is Puck Yeah, who totaled 871.5 versus Unicorns and Rainbows, who totaled 758.5 points for point spread 113 points, with Puck Yeah coming out on top. Top performers for Puck Yeah, his top performer was Frederick Anderson, who put up 115.5 fantasy points on the week. 5 wins, 0 losses, 1 shutout, 23.1 points per game. He's looking good down in Anaheim. Looks like he took the job. They sent Gibson down, so it's his to lose at this point. Looking good. Tyler Seguin was his next best player, 105 fantasy points. He had 4 goals, 4 assists. The 2 game-winning goals helped his total point and his point per game, which was 21.1. Blake Wheeler was his next best player, 90.5 points on the week. 2 goals, 2 assists, 26 PIMs, 18.1 points per game. That's a pretty good number for a guy like Blake Wheeler. UNR, his best players, Victor Hedman, 82.5 fantasy points, 3 goals, 4 assists, earning a 16.5 point per game clip. Ryan Callahan, another Lightning, was his next best player with 80 points on the week, 3 goals and 2 assists for the opening week, getting 16 points per game. Also good production. His third best player was Geno Malkin, 62 points only on the week, but had 2 goals, 5 assists. He was getting 15.5 points per game. Now that was one of the best as far as Unicorn and Rainbows goes as for points per game clip. That's why he got on the list. Underachievers for both teams, starting off with Puck Yeah. We'll start off with a couple of Avalanche here. He's got Ryan O'Reilly, who got 29.5 fantasy points on the week. He got, looks like a goal and an assist with a plus-minus rating of -5 for 5 points per game. That's not very good. Next, he had Gabriel Landeskog, who got 41 fantasy points on the week. He was -3 on the week. He had 1 goal, and he had a 6.9 point per game clip. That's not nearly good enough for neither one of those Avalanche. His next worst player was James Wisniewski, say that 3 times real fast. Anyways, he got 32.5 fantasy points, 1 assist and 15 shots on net. He's playing on the power play a bit. He only got 6.5 points per game. That's not good enough. There's better defensemen out there. Unicorns and Rainbows, worst players. We got Jacob Silverberg from the Ducks. He got 32 fantasy points. He only got 3 assists and he averaged 5.3 points per game. Next, we got Cam Fowler, another Duck. 40.5 points per game on 4 assists, but he only had 6 hits and he was going at 6.8 points per game. I'm going to like to see a little bit more to Cam Fowler moving forward. And next, it wasn't necessarily at the bottom tier of his players, but we've come to expect a lot from this guy, at least I have, and that's James Neal. He got 39.5 points on the week, 1 goal on 16 shots and a -3 rating. He's getting a lot of minutes, a lot of playing time. He should be relied upon heavily in Nashville, but he only got 7.9 points per game this week, so it'll be interesting to see if he's able to turn that around in the coming weeks here. Now, on to the owners' moves. Best move for Puck Yeah was Sunday. He was kind of in a tight battle, so to ensure his safety, he picked up Mason Raymond and Curtis Glencross, but Raymond was a good ad. He picked and played him, and Raymond had a goal and 2 assists on Sunday, so that was a solid move. And then one of the more questionable moves I see here is he's got Darcy Kemper, who put up 70 fantasy points on the week for a Wild team. They only played a couple games. Now, I don't know if this was just a fact of the matter of Kemper and Anderson playing on the same nights or what have you, or anyways, but he didn't have him in or get any points out of Darcy Kemper. And like I said, Kemper put up 70 points in a week where the Wild didn't play that much. So, I don't know. It looks like it could be trade bait maybe for me, or I don't know. Somebody might be wanting to look into making a deal for Darcy Kemper. Unicorns and Rainbows' best acquisition was Derek Brassard. Well, that was his only move of the week. He added Derek Brassard. Brassard put up a modest 56 points, so that's an okay move. I've got nothing bad to say about that. Then he had a struggling week here with Chris Kreider. Now, Kreider himself had a great week, 80 fantasy points on the week, but UNR only had him in for 34.5 of those points. That's a waste from a good week of production from one player. So in the next matchup, we've got Sean Sloppy Seconds, which I've officially dubbed into a submarine name, the SS2. He got 812 points. He was going against the Chislers, who look like they're moving to Winnipeg because he only got 702.5 points. Point spread of 109 points on the week, with the SS2 coming out on top. Top performers for each team. For the SS2, we've got Alex Ovechkin, no surprise here, 127.5 fantasy points on the week. 5 goals on 26 shots, 23 hits, 25 points per game. It's pretty impressive. He'll probably keep that up most of the season. That's the nice thing about Ovechkin. His next best player was Zach Parise, 90 fantasy points, 2 goals, 2 assists, 27 shots, 90 points, 22.5 points per game. That's pretty good. Minnesota didn't play that many games this week, so good point production from Parise. Carey Price was his next best player I have on here. 78.5 points on the week, 4 wins, 1 loss, 15.7 points per game. Moving over to the Chislers, top performer, and he had a bad week here. So his best performer was David Backus. 69 fantasy points, 2 goals, and 2 assists, good for 13.8 points per game. His next best player, I've got Sergei, the goalie, Bob Bobrovsky. Got 68.5 points, 3 wins, 1 loss, 105 saves, 14.7 points per game. And then Lucic was sleeping basically all week, but managed to pull up 68.5 points, 2 assists, 26 pims, and 14 hits, 9.8 points per game on the week. None of those would have cracked any of the other top point producers from any of the teams, so Chislers had a bad week here. Now moving on to underachievers. The SS2 had Nail Yakupov, 27 points on the week, 1 goal, 1 assist, -6 with 8 shots, 5.4 points per game. That's not nearly good enough. Then we got another Oiler here. We got Jordan Eberle, 27.5 points per game, 2 assists, -2 rating on the week, 9 shots on net. That's enough. Not enough for a guy with his style of game. 6.9 points per game. Next, I've got Drew Doughty. Now, Drew got 44 points. 2 assists, good for 7.3 points per game. That's not very good. I know Drew got drafted really high. He's going to have to elevate his game for fantasy owners to be happy with him. Moving on to the Chislers, we got Nugent Hopkins, who got 15 points on the week, 1 assist, -4 rating, 5 points per game on the week. That's, again, another Oiler underachieving. Next for him, we've got Jaromir Jagr, which is not looking good because the Devils are off to a really good start. They got some guys putting up some points, but Jagr's just not one of them. He had 33.5 points on the week from only 3 assists, 6.7 points per game. It's not going to get it done. Thomas Hertl was his next player. He had 40.5 points on the week, 2 goals on 7 shots. He also had 6.7 points per game. Now moving on, the SS2, his owner choice moves I've got here. He used all 4 of his moves this week, picking up the likes of Goodbranson, Raymond, Grabowski, Vlasic, who totaled for 11 points. So that's not even, So then his other move that I've got down here is Antti Niemi posted 78.5 fantasy points on the week, equaling Carey Price, who I've got in his top 3. However, the SS2 didn't have any Niemi points on the week, which means he never played him. Now, I don't know, that might be another one of those things where guys just match up, like Price and Niemi maybe playing on the same night, or one of his other goalies. But however, another candidate, possible trade bait there. So either both SS2 moves, I didn't like either of them. He's the only guy I think here who I got 2 negative moves, but he still managed to pull out a win at 812 to 702. Moving on to the Chislers. his best move of the week was a pick and play, I believe, on Sunday Sunday or Saturday. He picked up Svedberg for the Bruins, backup goalie who was playing in place of Rask against the Sabres. Posted him a shutout. That was a solid pick and play right there. Next, his owner move, I got the big problem this week was a couple of times I believe he missed setting his roster. Inevitably, you're never going to win a week if you're missing out on setting your roster. So the fantasy not so insider. I'm just going to tell you about some things in the news that are a little bit fantasy relevant. So I'm going to start off with Victor Hedman, who I had as a top 3 for one of our teams this week. He fractured a finger. He's out 4 to 6 weeks. Slava Voinov, now, he got arrested. He's got the Varlamov syndrome. He's got a domestic dispute going on. He got arrested this morning, so he's suspended indefinitely by the NHL, so that's something to keep an eye on. I'm not sure what's going to happen with him. Then on to Varlamov. He's day-to-day right now with a groin injury. You'll have to keep an eye on him. Datsuk. Now, I read that Datsuk might play on Tuesday, so that's good news for Datsuk owners. Franzen's been put on the 7-day IR, so he might play end of this week, but doesn't look like he's going to play it early this week. Eric Stahl, he's not going to play on Tuesday, and it's a huge secret on, whether or not what his timetable for return is. They said Skinner is also getting ready to return. Howard's on the IR in Detroit. He was put on the 48-hour IR. I wouldn't be too worried about that. Paul Stastny is labeled as week to week in St. Louis, so to me that means he's probably not going to play this week. Maybe next week if everything goes best case scenario, he'll be in the lineup. And then Evander Kane, according to Roto World on October 14th, he would be out about 3 weeks, and that was, I guess, a week ago now. So it doesn't look like he's going to play this week, but I keep an eye on him. If I owned him, he might, you never know. They might just throw him in the lineup, something to keep an eye on, but probably not till next week. So we had our first trade of the season this week. It came from Completely Stammered and Bomb Squad. Completely Stammered traded away Jonathan Taves and Patrick Sharp to Bomb Squad in return for Claude Giroux and Wayne Simmons. Now this is an interesting trade. There's some high-profile players on the move in this deal. Both teams are going to like what they get back, I'm sure. But I think the hidden gem in this trade is Wayne Simmons. I think that's what makes Completely Stammered come out a little bit on top in this trade. Simmons brings all the intangibles that our fantasy league asked for. So I think he's going to be the best player out of all these players traded come the end of the season as far as total fantasy points goes. So I think all in all that was a good trade, I think, for both teams. However, I think Wayne Simmons is the best player in the trade and will garner a trade win for Completely Stammered. So here we're going to go through the Lucky 13 of the week. What that is going to be the top 5 forwards, top 5 defensemen, and the top 3 goalies of each week. And we'll go from least to most here for forwards. Starting off with number 5, Tanner Pearson. He had 105 points, 5 goals, 2 assists, 1 game-winning goal, 9 shots, 11 hits. Great week for Tanner Pearson. Incredible for him to be in the top 5 after week 1. Fourth, we had Mike Camilleri, who had 106 points, also 5 goals, 2 assists, 1 game winner. However, he had 25 shots, so good week for Camilleri. Third was Steven Stamkos with 111.5 points, 5 goals, 2 assists, 1 game winning goal, and 28 shots on net. So looking good for Stamkos so far. Second, we had Rick Nash, who is leading the league in goals. He's got 7 goals. He's a +5. He's got 1 game winner, 22 shots. Even had a game where he left early for the birth of his baby, like I said, and still scored a goal in that game, so he's performing well. And number 1, we've got Ovi. He's got 127.5 points, 5 goals, 4 PIMs, 1 game-winning goal, 26 shots, 23 hits. That's a typical Ovi performance for a week right there. Moving on to the defense, number 1 we've got PK Subban with 106 points, 3 goals, 1 assist, 14 pims, 17 shots, 16 hits and 14 blocks. That's a pretty impressive stat line for a defenseman. That would have been good enough to get him into the top 5 overall players. Then next we got Shea Weber, 88 points, 3 goals, 1 assist, +5, 15 shots and 15 hits. Once again, solid performance from Shea. And then we got Victor Hedman with a surprising performance of 82.5 points, 3 goals, 4 assists, +2, 11 shots and 6 hits. So good week for Hedman. Another surprise at 4 we have Johnny Boychuk. He got 80.5 points, 2 goals, 4 assists, +4, 13 shots, 13 hits. And 5th, well, I guess tied for 4th really, because TJ Brody, he also had 80.5 points. He had 3 goals, 4 assists, +5 rating, 16 shots and 2 hits. So some solid performances from those defensemen there. Moving on to the goalies, number 1 was Frederick Anderson for the Anaheim Ducks. He had 115.5 points, 5 wins, 1 shutout, no loss, 7 goals against and 132 saves. It's a good start for a goalie there. Second, we have Jonathan Quick. He got 111 points with 1 shutout, 3 wins, 1 loss, 9 goals against and 174 saves. So Quick is looking like he's gonna have a bounce back year. I know he wasn't too bad last year, but he could have been better. So looking good for Quick. Then in 3rd we had 3 guys tied: Price, Niemi, and Rene, all tied at 78.5 points. But I'm gonna skip them and give the number 3 of the lucky 13 for the goalies to Jonas Hiller, who's a free agent in our league. He had 76 fantasy points, 9 goals against, 147 saves. That's pretty good for a team like Calgary. That's an impressive stat to put up. So in week 2, we've got some interesting matchups. Basically, every matchup I think I see here is going to be a good one, except for the one I'm in, but you never know. So the first matchup I'm going to just talk about is Unicorns and Rainbows versus Sad Sacks, both 0-1. Sad Sacks and Unicorns both had decent weeks last week. And yeah, so one of them's going to come out at 500 and one's going to be 0-2. And then in the second matchup, we've got Puck Yeah and Sloppy Seconds, who both had, I believe, 800 point total victories last week. So again, one of them is going to come out 1-1 and one will be undefeated at the end of this week. And then the next matchup is another pair of 0-1 teams in Carlson's Anarchy and Completely Stammered. Like the matchup here, but I'm just looking at it, and Carlson's of Anarchy had a bad first night. He's at -0.1 right now. That's too bad. And then second to last matchup I have here is 2 1-0 teams, Route 66 and Bomb Squad, both of whom put up over 900 points last week. That should be a slugfest, so I'm interested to see how that one plays out. And then the last matchup is Mercedes-Benz versus the Chislers, the highest point total from last week in Mercedes-Benz against the lowest point total last week in the Chislers. So we'll see how that shakes out. Also, because now the weeks are back to 7-day weeks instead of whatever the first one was there, 10 or 12, I think it was 10, I'm not sure. But I reduced the weekly moves per team down from 4 to 3. So the rest of the season will be 3 moves a week off the waiver wire. Trades don't count.